Today we're going to talk about where some of the migrant children that have crossed into the United States over the past couple of years have ended up. We also are going to talk about foster children in the United States and how over the past 20 years, 100,000 foster children have gone missing. They have not been found. And because they're foster kids, if they aren't found while they're still in the foster system, eventually they will be purged from that system. And no one is looking for them. And because they may not have anything on record as an adult, like if they don't turn up somewhere and use their real name and social security number and things like that, we don't know. No one's looking for them, and we don't know what happens to them. I'm going to give you some examples of that, because this is something that if you are not paying attention to, like the amount of unidentified bodies that are just in morgues or they've been buried without a name, some of them are younger people. And the reason that they're not identified is because they were moved. They either ran away or someone took them across state lines to another place, and then they were murdered. So there's some really sad cases out there with that going on. There's one that I'll talk about from Highland Park, Michigan, the Highland Park Jane Doe. Well, actually, it's the second Highland Park Jane Doe. The first one is from the late 1970s, early 80s, I believe. This one is from 1996, and then we'll talk about the Chelsea Jane Doe as well. These are just two cases of young women who were found murdered, and no one has identified them yet. One young lady was murdered in 1996, the other one in 2000. So we're talking quite a while ago, and no one has come forward to identify them. The young woman in Highland Park, Michigan, they think a teenager, possibly maybe 20-ish. They're not sure, but she was dressed like a preteen. So, we don't know what was going on there. And then the Chelsea Jane Doe, they believe that she was maybe in her early 20s. But if you listen to what the detective says, they think that she was a trafficking victim. So let's start off with where some of the migrant children have ended up.
Across the Midwest, advocates working with the minors say they're migrants, some as young as 13, working overnight shifts and employed to clean slaughterhouses at 13 different locations in 8 different states. In total, 102 minors, employed by the company Packer Sanitation Services, or PSSI. The company contracted nationwide with facilities in Kansas, Minnesota, and Nebraska, which were found to employ the most teenagers, according to the Department of Labor. Investigators sharing the details in a teleconference today.
We found that over the course of the past 3 years, PSSI employed at least 102 children in hazardous work, cleaning dangerous power-driven equipment like skull splitters and razor-sharp bone saws, and used caustic chemicals.
It's a story we first reported earlier this year. At the time, we spoke with Audrey Lutz, who has been helping migrant children who say they've worked at one of those plants. You met them. Do they look like adults to you?
I would have a hard time ever calling the people I've met with adults. They certainly look, especially the youngest middle schoolers, no way to pass as an adult.
Today, in a statement, Packer Sanitation Services said, in part, our company has a zero-tolerance policy against employing anyone under the age of 18 and fully shares the DOL's objective of ensuring full compliance at all locations. As soon as we became aware of the DOL's allegations, we conducted multiple additional audits of our employee base and hired a third-party law firm to review and help further strengthen our policies in this area. Investigators say PSSI had previously flagged some applicants were too young, but proceeded to employ them anyway, calling these violations, quote, corporate-wide failures.
Make no mistake, this was no clerical error or actions of rogue individuals or bad managers.
As a result, PSSI was fined and has paid $1.5 million in penalties.
Julia Ainsley joins us now. So, Julia, as we heard in your piece, the investigation notes that it was a systemic problem when it came to hiring minors. But given how many of them were employed as young as 13, could this cleaning company face any criminal charges?
Well, you know, the Department of Labor today did not preclude criminal charges from coming later, but that would be announced by the Justice Department. But people I've spoken to, advocates who are representing the children, say $1.5 million is really a drop in the bucket when you consider that there were over 100 children working for this company and considering their large profit margins. Although the company PSSI does say that they believe these were rogue individuals who came in with fraudulent identities, people representing the kids say it was hard to mistake an 18-year-old for a 13-year-old.
And Julia, I know you are just getting back to Washington after seeing one of these facilities.
Yeah, that's right. I just landed. I just got back from Grand Island, Nebraska, where I got to see firsthand the first facility where the Labor Department came in October and found 23 children working in the dead of night, cleaning up blood and animal parts off the kill house floor in a slaughterhouse. And what I saw just from being there firsthand is how massive this facility is and what a big operation they have, slaughtering thousands of animals a day, but that the town is so centered around this large meat processing facility. People I spoke to there said it was common knowledge that there were children working at this facility and going to school during the day. There were even some police reports where teachers and school officials said that there were children falling asleep in class because of their work overnight at the slaughterhouse, Joe.
By employing underage workers. News 8's Byron Tellison joins us now with more on the investigation, plus reaction from a longtime migrant lawyer in Grand Rapids. Byron.
Amanda, the investigation found that young workers have been working in potentially dangerous jobs in Kent County to get by, with some even dropping out of school. A food manufacturer in Kent County illegally employed underage migrant children in unsafe conditions, according to a new report from the New York Times. The investigation found that Hearthside Food Solutions, a food processing manufacturer with multiple production locations in Kent County, violated child labor laws by employing young workers in dangerous jobs.
But it's the most hidden workforce. Even though I'm not surprised by it, it doesn't shock me at all. A lot of people are still taken aback by what really goes on to get their food on their plate.
Hearthside is one of the nation's largest contract manufacturers, making food for companies like General Mills and Frito-Lay. Some underage workers said moving cereal all night on conveyor belts hurt their backs, and their lungs would sting from spicy dust from large batches of flaming hot Cheetos. At least one was a Union high school student, whom, according to their teacher, dropped out of school as they worked late nights in production.
They have to work to survive. They have to be hired. And when they have to choose between school or earning a living to cover their basic needs or cover expenses for their families back home, they will choose work over their health and over their education every time.
Teresa Hendricks has worked as a migrant lawyer in Grand Rapids for more than 3 decades. She says, sadly, this report is not surprising.
I've represented 4- and 6-year-old workers for wage claims. So it's not surprising when I hear about exploitation in our food supply chain, and it's not surprising that it's dealing with younger workers, especially when we have a labor shortage right now, and it's been growing.
Hearthside reportedly hired the underage workers through the Grand Rapids employment agency Forge Industrial Staffing. 3 people who used to work at the agency told the Times that Hearthside supervisors were made aware they were getting younger-looking workers whose identities were flagged as false, but nothing was done about it. Hearthside also reportedly admitted it did not require Forge to verify ages through a national system that checks Social Security numbers. Hendricks hopes the report will lead to improved working conditions and more oversight and accountability of this industry.
Well, I've been representing farm workers for 30 years, and this goes back to my very beginnings. And so about every 10 years, there'll be a major expose where it's exposed. But in between those times, it stays hidden as a private secret. Actually, it's an open secret.
Hearthside says in a statement to News 8 that it's appalled by the article, and it's hired a law firm to conduct a review of the company's employment practices and plant safety protocols, which it expects to take 60 days. Hearthside also says it's taken steps to confirm all of its workers are above the age of 18 and comply with all laws and regulations. Forge told the Times it complied with the law and would never knowingly employ individuals under 18. We've reached out to Forge for a statement as well. Amanda?
Okay, so those are just two clips about kids working in dangerous jobs that no one under 18 is supposed to be working in. They are putting them on midnight shifts because obviously that's that shift where you have trouble finding people to work it. And they probably were able to slip the kids in without people noticing as much. But I am sure that in all of the places where you have children working, somebody notices. Like, some of the pictures of these kids, like, they're so little, you know it's not an adult. So here's the deal. Why are we not hearing about this much? Well, these are big companies. These are not like small little mom and pop joints that are employing these kids. And remember, big corporations give campaign donations. So if you have a company in your state that's, pretty big and they're donating to your campaign, maybe you don't say too much about, human trafficking because you know that companies in your state are benefiting from it. So this is a uniparty thing. This is not a left or right deal. We have representatives on both sides of the aisle that are sitting back and not saying much. I mean, like this particular instance in Nebraska, like I've been to Grand Island, and it's a town that is really kind of focused around the slaughterhouse, like this is a big job there. And I know that there were people there that knew what was going on. Like the reporter said, yeah, it's got to be common knowledge. So many people in the town work there, they do something there, so they would be aware. And if teachers have filed police reports, like what happens after that? Same thing in West Michigan. Like people had to have known that these migrant children were working in these factories. So I'm really thankful that Hannah Dreier, who wrote the New York Times article, did that, because this is why these things happened, why these companies were caught doing this, because she was exposing it. Otherwise, those kids would still be working in those places. And the fact that they're saying, oh, we didn't know. You can use E-Verify to make sure that the person's giving you their real name, real social security number, all that stuff. So there's no excuse for this. But some companies, I have worked for some, they choose not to use E-Verify because they know that a lot of the employees that they get are not here legally. So that's something that I saw years ago when I worked at a place. We had a lot of workers who were not here legally, so the administration just didn't use E-Verify. And I think it's really disturbing that initially when the Labor Department found that these kids were working in this slaughterhouse in Grand Island, they told the Labor Department, oh my gosh, they just used false identification. We had no idea. So they tried to blame the kids. Like, how crazy is that? They tried to blame the kids. Like the kids were trying to do something shady and they show up with false identification and they hire them. But then they also found out that same company hired the same minor twice. The minor was hired under one name, got fired, and then when they came back with a different name, they were hired again. Now, this is just ridiculous, but it also means that these companies can pay these kids a lot less, right? And the poor kids don't get to take the money home. They don't get to keep the money. They have to pay off debts to the traffickers, or they send money home or split the cost. Like they have to pay for their so-called sponsor, who really is a trafficker. So this is happening, people. It's happening. And don't let anybody tell you that it's not. So one more clip about the kids that have come across the southern border, and it is from a law enforcement officer that works on the southern border, and he is reacting to some of the statements that Tim Ballard has made because, some people are trying to say that Tim Ballard, he's just making all of this up. So let's hear what he has to say.
Crisis. Tim Ballard, the inspiration for Sound of Freedom's main character, played by Jim Caviezel, doubling down on claims that the U.S. government, intentionally or not, is in essence assisting the cartel's massive human trafficking machine.
But the fact that you do nothing for that child other than send them to whoever the child traffickers in Mexico are giving as the point of contact, that's trafficking. And we're complicit in it.
Joining us right now, Lieutenant Christopher Olivares from the Texas Department of Public Safety. You and I have chatted about this extensively over the past couple of years. I want to play a part of Tim Ballard's interview and have you respond on the other side.
The United States is the #1 consumer of child sex material in the world. And so when you have tens of thousands of unaccompanied children being dropped off and lost into the belly of that, that's scary.
So where are these kids going?
That's a good question, Adrian. It's very disturbing, hearing some of those comments, especially somebody, coming from Tim Ballard, who has been on the front lines, that knows the ins and outs of child trafficking. This is a reality of the situation on the border. And when you look at the past 2 years, and even right now, there's over 85,000 children that are not accounted for because there's no type of intervention from the federal government to actually vet these children, these unaccompanied children that are being brought across the border that are going to these sponsors. A lot of these children that are coming across, I've seen it with my own eyes. These children are brought across by a smuggler in Mexico. They'll have some type of, message on their body or a piece of paper that has an address and a phone number, and that's it. And then from there, that child moves from that point to wherever the destination may be. So there's no vetting process to see who that sponsor is, if it's an actual relative, what the background is on those sponsors, because there's so many children that are being brought across the border that, agents themselves don't have the time to process or even vet these sponsors. And that's why we're losing children in this country right now. And in fact, even our state troopers at the state level, we have rescued over 900 children in the past 2 years when we started border operations. These are children that are being smuggled in vehicles. Just most recently, 2 weeks ago, we recovered 2 juveniles, a 15 and a 16-year-old, that were being smuggled in the trunk of a car from Eagle Pass, Texas. They were being smuggled to Houston, Texas, which we know is a hub for human trafficking, sex trafficking. So it's a very serious situation, and I think it requires more attention as far as what's happening on the border when we talk about unaccompanied children and children that are being victimized due to smuggling.
So I don't want to mince words. I want you to go on the record. You agree with what Tim Ballard is saying. You're saying that agents actually take those notes that we've seen. I've seen it with the network I worked with before I came to News Nation. They have a phone number, a contact name, and so you're saying without any background check, without any kind of associative vetting, they just send that child to that particular person.
Right. And I mean, they've admitted themselves that they don't even do DNA testing to see if this child is actually a relative to whatever sponsor, whatever member they're going to. And also, you got to keep in mind, too, a lot of the times these sponsors or whoever's facilitating the transport in the U.S. with the cartels or the smugglers in Mexico, a lot of times, if they don't have the money to pay that debt, that child's going to get lost in the sex or labor trafficking trade. And that's why it's very serious, and it doesn't get a lot of attention, but it's a clear reality of what's happening on the border. We see it all the time with unaccompanied children, and the question should be raised, well, what's happening with these children when they're being brought across? What is the vetting process? What's being done to stop the trafficking? And I can tell you from experience as a law enforcement official, nothing's being done to protect these children.
I want to just confirm something you may or may not know about, because I think it's out of your jurisdiction, but there was a facility in San Diego during the pandemic where we were told that unaccompanied minors were being housed and that they were going to be placed in the foster care system. Do you know anything about that?
I do not, but also that's another situation too, right? So we don't know what the process is with that. We don't know what happens with these children when they're in this foster care, especially during the pandemic. That's why a lot of these children are lost right now. As I mentioned when I gave you that number, over 85,000 in the past 2 years. So again, it's a combination of multiple situations that have happened over the past 2 years. But the fact of the matter is that when you continue having children being brought across the border, unaccompanied children, this is a cause of it. And also keep in mind too, when I mentioned before, and some of the correspondents from News Nation have covered this, the children that are being brought across, they have wristbands on their wrists, because it shows that whoever facilitated the transport has paid the cartel. So the cartels place wristbands on children when they bring them across the border. That's a form of modern day slavery, and that's what we're seeing, and that's a clear reality of the situation at the border.
So thank you for watching.
Okay, so now we have someone who works along the border telling us that what Tim Ballard has said about child trafficking is accurate, and he agrees with it. And the reason that I included that is because we're still getting a lot of weirdness about Tim Ballard and Sound of Freedom, Operation Underground Railroad, all that stuff. And I just feel like there's a reason that these news outlets are focusing on Tim Ballard instead of the problem at hand. And I saw an interview with him, and he makes a great point. He says, you're actually not hurting me or Jim Caviezel, you're hurting these kids who are out there suffering. And he's 100% right there. You don't have to like Tim Ballard. You don't have to like Sound of Freedom, Operation Underground Railroad, whatever. You don't have to like any of that. But what is very important is that you get educated on this issue, because we have been told for far too long that this is just some type of conspiracy theory. But I'm here to tell you it's not. And I mean, it just blows my mind that people just are willing to take that at face value. And I guess it's because people don't want to talk about it. I am glad to see that we have had some hearings before Congress for, whistleblowers and people from the border to come and tell us what's going on down there. But let's be real. This is something that has been happening in our country for a very long time. And so next we're going to watch a video about the Chelsea Jane Doe. And I just, this is just one video. There are so many. If you follow true crime at all, then you know that there are lots of unidentified bodies out there who no one knows who they are. One theory as to why that is because there are so many foster kids that have gone missing. And like I said, once they age out of that system, no one's looking for them. So this is something that has been going on for a very long time. Like I said, this video that we're going to watch, I think it was 2018. This crime happened in 2000. So, now we're at 23 years. I did check. She has not been identified yet. So let's take a listen.
Discovery in a parking lot, the mutilated, headless body of a young woman. Child advocates suspect she may have been among many missing and forgotten foster kids, and this murder victim remains unidentified.
In tonight's New England's Unsolved, Boston 25's Bob Ward shows us that while this Jane Doe in Chelsea may have fallen through the cracks in life, police are now trying to give her name back in death.
This is the face of a young woman who will never grow old, a young woman whose identity is lost. This is the Chelsea Jane Doe. 18 years after police discovered her mutilated body beneath a blanket at the back of a Chelsea parking lot, and more than a decade after police caught her killer, Chelsea Police Chief Brian Keyes won't let her go.
I look at that face, and again, that's somebody's daughter, and that is it's beyond heartbreaking.
On November 13th, 2000, Chief Keyes was called out to the Soldiers' Home in Chelsea. Nothing could prepare him for what he saw underneath that blanket.
In 31 years of my career, I've never seen anything like that.
The killer dismembered the young woman's body, cutting off her hands, her feet, her head. It would be 4 years before those body parts would be found buried at Nahant Beach inside plastic containers.
Her head was found on the beach, correct? Where people go. People walk all the time.
Correct.
So that's where she was for 4 years.
Correct.
Unbelievable. Police work led to this man, Eugene McCollum, who told investigators Jane Doe was a prostitute, that he picked her up in Boston's Theater District and brought her to his tiny room at the Lynn YMCA. He told police he killed her after a dispute over money.
He was claiming self-defense. He was claiming that the victim in this case got a hold of a knife that he had in his room and tried to attack him. He gave some account that he's living in a small room. He had to dispose of the body, so in his own wisdom, he decided the only way I could do that is to take the body out in pieces, if you will.
McCollum is in prison for killing and beheading a Boston man and the Chelsea Jane Doe. But before he was locked up, McCollum gave detectives information that could help identify his victim. He said her name was Lisa and that she was from Philadelphia.
Chief, are you surprised no one has stepped forward in all these years to say, I know who she is?
Many years have gone by, but I know initially there was some outreach to the greater Philadelphia area. And, but again, that's what she said. Whether or not she could have been from, Washington State, California, God only knows.
At the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Robert Lowry says there could be a simple reason why no one has identified Chelsea Jane Doe. Lowry, a former St. Louis homicide commander, believes she may have been in foster care.
The fact is, no one seems to be looking for this child, even though we have some ideas of her origins, where she's from, possibly out of Philadelphia, found in Boston. She was a child sex trafficking victim.
This is the first reconstruction that I did with just the bun because her hair was so short.
Here at the National Center, forensic artist Christy Andrews brings this Jane Doe's face back to life. To use similar techniques to help solve the Bella Bond case.
We don't want this individual to sit there with a number. We don't want them to be a number. We want them to be a name.
Chief Kai's hopes all this work will soon reveal a secret that's haunted him for years. It's something that, it stays in the back of your mind. I mean, it's easy for me to say it keeps me up at night, but it's different than that. It's something that it's always there.
Chelsea Jane Doe's killer, Eugene McCollum, is in a Massachusetts prison for her murder and for killing and decapitating a Boston man. McCollum has also been a possible suspect in other murders in the area. If you have any information about this Jane Doe, please call Massachusetts State Police at 978-745-8908.
All right, so that was about the Chelsea Jane Doe. The next clip that we're going to watch is about the Highland Park Jane Doe, who was murdered in 1996 and has still not been identified. The clip that we're going to watch is from 2018.
She's one of hundreds of unidentified people in Michigan morgues tonight, most of them in Wayne County.
This Jane Doe was a young woman, maybe even a child. So who wanted her dead and why?
7 Action News reporter Andrea Isom is working with state police tonight to crack an unsolved mystery.
She was shot to death at close blank range. Her homicide was beyond brutal. Someone out there knows something and must know who she is. The Michigan State Police Department is searching for justice, answers, and so am I.
There was so much blood. The injury to her throat, it was horrific. It's a very personal wound. This was a death shot.
With a shotgun, the weapon perhaps placed right at her throat.
It could have been a sign to silence her. She just looked so young and so innocent. It was a really horrific crime. A young person left in an alley.
In this alley, behind 387 Cortland, in Highland Park, in May of 1996.
After her body was found, a witness came forward and said that in the middle of the night that they heard the shotgun blast ring out, and nobody called the police. And it wasn't until the following morning that somebody was, walking through the neighborhood and came across her remains.
The homicide. But who is she? It's been more than 20 years, and police still don't know her name. Detective Sergeant Sarah Krebs, with the Michigan State Police Missing Persons Coordination Unit, is desperate to find her loved ones and get her the justice she deserves.
We've always thought of her as a kid.
As young as 15 or as old as 25. And according to the medical examiner's office, she could be biracial.
She was probably white and black.
Yeah.
She had her hair pulled back into a ponytail. She had very tight, curled hair, but it was brown with a reddish tint to it. She was about 5'3", and she was almost 200 pounds. No makeup and covered in freckles. She was really dressed like a 5-year-old would have been dressed. She had a giant white bow in her hair. She had this white skirt, a shirt with a bunch of smiley faces and lip prints all over it. She had a teddy bear watch. Maybe she was special needs. Maybe somebody else had her dressed that way.
Could she have been a victim of human trafficking?
Maybe she came from a foster care situation, or maybe somewhere where somebody is just not actively looking for her, or maybe doesn't even know that she is missing.
And it makes me so angry. Sarah, you have kids. I have a stepdaughter. When I see her, that's what I see.
Yeah, I think this, any parent out there is probably just thinking, how can this happen? But this does happen. I mean, we have 300 some cases where we can document that people end up in the morgue and don't get identified, and nobody ever comes forward for them.
State police had her body exhumed from this Canton cemetery in 2015.
We exhumed her for a DNA profile. It has not hit in CODIS, meaning that we're still waiting for that family to come forward and give us their family reference samples.
With this case, we do have fingerprints, yes?
We have one fingerprint on file that we're able to retrieve from her body.
Crime Stoppers is offering a reward for information that leads to the identity of this Jane Doe and an arrest.
Who are you? Just give us her name. Somebody out there loves her.
MSP needs someone, anyone who recognizes her to reach out to them right away. It has been far too long, and this young woman deserves to rest in peace. And detectives will continue their mission to find her murderer. And I will too. I'm Andrea Isom, 7 Action News.
Highland Park is a little city right next to Detroit. And the reason that no one called the police during that evening when they heard the gunshot is because in Highland Park, after the streetlights come on everybody knows, or at least this is how it was when I was growing up. Everybody knew around that time that you needed to be in the house away from windows because there was gonna be gunshots all throughout the night. So no one would think to call the police per se. Also, I believe that this is around the time where the Highland Park Police Department was disbanded because they didn't have any money. My sister's brother-in-law used to be a police officer there, and one day he came home and, told his wife that they were ending the police department there. They have since reinstated it, but when that happens, then like the Michigan State Police are in charge. They would come and answer calls or whatever. But for most people in Highland Park, I would say you don't think about really calling the police if you hear gunshots, because gunshots, you're going to hear them all the time. This is another thing that makes me think that this probably was a child, like Detective Krebs. She talks about how maybe somebody had this young woman dressed this way, like a 5-year-old, like a really young kid. But that person knew exactly where to go, kill this young woman, because Highland Park, like I said, I believe that they didn't have a police force at this time. And even if they did, it was really bad there. So this person went there, shot her, dumped her in an alley. And that video that we watched was made 5 years ago, and they still have not identified her. So these are the types of things that we don't hear about often. There are websites. The Charlie Project has a bunch of missing people listed there, people that just vanish. But we know that a lot of the unidentified bodies are probably some of those missing people, and they just haven't been lined up yet. Their family members haven't submitted a DNA sample or something like that. But this is what we're dealing with. When we talk about trafficking, we do have to realize that this is not a new thing. It kind of seems like for some people, I haven't been hearing about this, but it's an open secret. You don't hear about it because just like I showed you those videos, the one video, the Highland Park Jane Doe, it has about 1,700 views, but think about that, 1,700 views. Highland Park is in Michigan. There's about 10 million people there. Sure, some people may have watched it on TV, but how many people really paid attention to that story and dug into it to see what was going on? And then the Chelsea Jane Doe, same thing there. Why isn't anybody looking for this person? And especially since they seem to be young women, no one's looking for them. That's why in both of those videos, you'll see that the law enforcement officers say could be a foster situation, right? Could be a trafficking situation. It's not a coincidence that the two officers in totally different places, totally different cases bring up those two things. The reason that they bring them up is because these things happen. And I know that mainstream media has tried to convince us that they don't, but they do. And all you have to do is look for evidence. So I don't care if you like Sound of Freedom, whatever. I just want people to be educated on this issue, because there are a lot of mainstream outlets that are saying that child trafficking is just a conspiracy, and it's not true. The final thing that I'm going to share in this video is an op-ed by a woman she's had 10 foster kids. She's just sharing some experiences. And to be honest, this is the only way that you truly can know what's going on. You've got to get in there and see it for yourself. The reason that I'm so passionate about this stuff is I grew up in Detroit, and I saw some really messed up things, and I know people who were trafficked, and a lot of them are dead. I also taught at a school where 90% of our students were refugees. So I've heard these stories about the refugee camps, about, sometimes kids show up and they're living with relatives, and relatives are okay with really using them, trafficking them from the house. So you think it's just a normal family situation, and the kid is being trafficked in the house. So, these things happen, and it blows my mind that people just want to say that this is all conspiracy theory. I think a lot of it has to do with money. Like I said, it's not really a right or left issue. It's more of the uniparty, because in order to get these kids into factories and slaughterhouses and stuff like that, you've got to know you've got to know that, yes, some kids are going to end up working in those places, but some of them are going to be sex trafficked. And once you know that, what are you saying to yourself? Well, that's okay because the corporation in my state is going to save some money? Is that what our representatives are saying? I don't know. I don't want to put words in their mouths, but I mean, it's something to think about. So let's hear what this lady who has had 10 foster kids, and she also runs an organization called Gen Justice. I think that they've changed their name now, but it's trying to make sure that foster kids have photo ID, because some of them don't have that, fingerprint, things like that. So let's hear what she had to say. I'm just going to read the article. Foster care children are easy prey for predators. They disappear without a real search. So that's the title of the article. And then the subtitle is, Predators think no one will look for these missing kids in foster care. Today, unfortunately, they are right. An estimated 55 children will disappear from America's foster care system today. For too many, there will be no canvassing the streets in search of them. No pictures posted, no social media campaigns. Not for these kids. Anaya Walker was 16 when she went missing in late 2019. She was living in a group home, and her family says she was a victim of sex trafficking. 5 months later, her body, shoeless and disfigured, was found discarded on the median of a freeway. It took the police 12 days to identify her. In the past 20 years, agencies have closed the cases of more than 100,000 missing American foster children before they were found. Tens of thousands are listed as runaways. Others simply remain missing, and the state has no idea where they are, disappearing without real searches. Having been a foster mom to 10 children in Arizona, I know from personal experience how vulnerable these kids are. One infant I fostered was born to an 11-year-old. Naively, I asked the social worker if the grandmother would help the new mother raise the baby. She didn't think so, the social worker told me. Grandma is the reason the child got pregnant. Grandma was pimping her out. The social worker was nonplussed. This wasn't her first rodeo. The need for reform is urgent. Tens of thousands of American boys and girls in foster care are disappearing with little real effort to search for them. In some states, cases can be closed after only 6 months. In other cases, as we reported on in Arizona, a child may not even have a photograph of herself that can be shared with police. The privacy laws may prevent her full name from being shared publicly to help in the search. It should come as no surprise that foster kids constitute most of Americans' sexually trafficked kids. Predators know that children without stable families are easy prey, and sometimes relatives prey on their own. Without involved families to lead the search, without motivated authorities to search, and hindered by the laws to prevent transparency about the details of the child's identity, tens of thousands of missing foster children remain just that way, trafficked and missing. We do not have nationwide protocols for the prevention of disappearances or for the search and recovery of missing foster kids. Had Anaya disappeared from a traditional family setting, she might still be alive, like Alicia Kay. Alicia was a typical teen living in a Pennsylvania suburb in 2002 when she slipped out to meet a new friend she had met online. The 38-year-old predator kidnapped and raped her while streaming the abuse online. It is a horrific story, but it ends with Alicia's rescue. Due to the family's diligence, police immediately searched. A recent photo of Alicia was plastered on walls, bulletin boards, and television. Alicia was ultimately recovered by the FBI. As with many recovered children, someone recognizing her photo helped save her life. Basic protections for foster children. Basic protections governing our children must be brought to bear on children in state care for whom the state is responsible. This spring, a robust package of laws championed by my organization, Gen Justice, will begin to protect the missing and trafficked children of Arizona, where we are headquartered. Working with our friends in law enforcement, we created a free photo ID integrated with search and rescue systems, so missing children can be searched for within minutes. Our missing kids will now also be reported to law enforcement within 2 hours rather than weeks later or not at all. And we required the state to arm children in care with information about predators, the same as we parents teach our own kids. All states should make searches immediate, mandatory, and ongoing. Predators think no one will look for these missing kids. Today, they are right. We must show them that we will put a stop to their violence and trafficking of children. Now, that is by Darcy Olson. She's the founder and CEO of Gen Justice. Olson founded Gen Justice in honor of her foster baby, Abel, who lived just 56 days. She is author of The Right to Try and a 10-time foster parent. So this is someone who is on the front line. She is trying to help these children who don't have proper parenting at home and society is kind of forgotten about. So when we talk about this is just not happening, and we're hearing it from someone who has had 10 foster kids and started an organization to help ensure that foster kids are safe. This is someone I would say, hey, look up her organization, look her up, get in touch, see what you can do to help. Also contact your local foster system if you are able to foster kids, because there are a lot in the system right now. Some of the kids that have come across the border have been put into the foster system because they're so young. There are kids who are babies who are being handed across the border. So think about that. I just looked at a job, well, it's a volunteer position to work with refugees who have come to Utah. They are overflowing with refugees, and most of them are kids. They also need foster parents for refugee kids, as well as kids in the United States that are American citizens. As a former teacher and someone who has volunteered with working with refugees, teaching English, I can tell you, when I saw Sound of Freedom, I was so excited because there are stories that we don't want to hear, stories that we hope are not true and we want to be fake, but they're not. So be careful when you're online. There are some people who they have some type of beef with Tim Ballard or whatever, but let me just tell you this. Whatever flaws the man has and whatever he's done, he has created a situation where people actually are paying attention about child trafficking. And once you start paying attention about child trafficking, it's not something that you just can say, well, it happens, I can't do anything about it. Trust me on this. When I taught kids that were coming from all these different countries where they had been through so much, there had been rapes in the refugee camps, there had been trafficking in the refugee camps, all types of stuff going on, drugs, everything. And when I heard their stories, and I taught 5th grade at this school, so these weren't like high school kids, these were 10-year-old kids. And they have been through all of this stuff. So when you are saying that Sound of Freedom is just ridiculous and it's conspiracy theory and it's QAnon, please do your research. But one way for you to do your research is to actually get involved. Go out there, volunteer. You don't have to give money to these organizations. If you don't trust Operation Underground Railroad, whatever. There's a ton of other organizations. But don't use that as an excuse for you to do nothing. There are things that you can do. Contact an agency that you trust. Look into fostering a refugee kid if you can. Look into fostering an American kid if you can. Get involved. Help out. Volunteer. Give your time. Open up your house. There's so many things that you can do. And another place for you to check is your local police department. Go talk to the police in your community. Ask them what's going on. I am lucky to know several police officers, and they've helped me out with some books that are written, like they're all fiction or whatever, but I like to ask them questions like, what is going on? Is this happening? And for my first book, I found out all types of stuff. I was like, are you kidding me? Is this really happening? And then I also had my own experience of growing up in Detroit where, yes, people are trafficked constantly. I'll never forget being in high school and hearing stories that there were some girls who had run away from home and eventually they disappeared from school. But before they disappeared, they would tell stories that they were living at drug houses and the drug dealers would traffic them out of the house. So then that house would be a drug house and a house where people would come and abuse these girls. So this is not like some secret thing or something that just started or whatever. Another thing that you can do to help, this is something I used to do, but it became just a little too gruesome. I think I talked about this before. I used to go on Name Us, where they have listings of unidentified remains that they've found, and I would try to match those things up with missing teenagers. And it's a really gruesome thing once you find out that there are all these bodies that they don't know who they are, and a lot of them appear to be teenagers, some even younger. So just before you decide to listen to these, like this American Crime Journal, Vice News, NBC News, I mean, all of these places that are just like, this is a QAnon conspiracy theory. Before you do that, there are different ways for you to do research, and you don't just have to do it online. Like I said, go get involved. Go find out what's going on in your area from the local police. Volunteer with some refugees. Take in some foster kids. All of these things. If you really want to know what's going on, then you've got to get your hands dirty. Don't let me tell you. Go out there and see for yourself.